Yeah, I feel like all of those professions that you mentioned already have converged to a degree. And so I guess the real question is how much more integration and convergence can they go through, and how much of the original industries and the original practices of those professions will endure in the new converged environment.
There is already a very significant interaction between PR and journalism that's happening, and it's not necessarily a good thing for the quality of news, for the quality of journalism, of course. But beyond that as well, particularly also again through the role of social media, through the role of online media more generally, we're seeing a kind of a weakening of the boundaries of what is journalism and what isn't. We're seeing a lot of individual people operating as freelance journalists, but also perhaps in PR contexts. We're seeing some outlets being set up that seem to be working on a journalistic basis, but essentially are doing PR for particular companies, for particular products as well. So because, particularly in an online context, those boundaries are not always very clear, we're already seeing a crossover between these different groups. Now that's not necessarily a good thing. In fact, it's quite certainly a bad thing in some contexts, because there is for the user of journalism, for the audience of journalism, it becomes harder and harder now to distinguish between genuine, carefully researched and verified journalistic content and other content that is simply coming out of a commercial promotion that's trying to sell you a product or promote a particular service. So for audiences, it's becoming harder and harder to tell, I think, what the difference is between news and PR, and that certainly is a problem.
I think that's a tough one, but I think ultimately as industries, no, I don't believe they're going to converge. I think they will always have their own independent place, and I think it's important that they do so. I think particularly it's, for the rigour of journalism, it needs to maintain its independence, otherwise all its kind of authentication is lost. But I do think we need to consider that PR, marketing and journalism have always had a long relationship. When we consider the role of spin doctors in political communication, for example, I think the thing that is really key is the media upon which that relationship starts to shift, whether it be photography, radio, broadcast TV, and now social media. With each kind of nuanced or new introduction of new technical media changes, new relationships are brought forth through that process. So I think it's really about the space and where their practices or their businesses are starting to converge. I think the practice of journalism is becoming more participatory, and that's also shaping a lot of those practices. But I think ultimately we do really need to maintain the independence of journalism, and it does perform a really integral role in society. We need to be able to really clearly identify the fluff from the fact.
So I don't think they're going to converge, and I think it's becoming, they are becoming a bit closer. I think that there is more, there are more tensions between, journalists who want to do, free journalism and news companies that want to find new ways to, monetize their news output, and PR journalism is really, increasingly becoming a major way to do that. It is an issue now, but I always think that there will be people, if journalism is to be conceived as something that people reporting on something and investigating something and then distributing that somehow, then I think that will always be there. So I think that journalism will always be there in some form. And I think that, for example, blogging is a good example of where there's some journalism is being performed outside of the major news companies. So that kind of journalism will always be there. But there is a tension, and I guess we can see that through the rise of native advertising. It's sort of where it's basically sponsored content. That is becoming more prominent in news outlets, particularly in emerging youth outlets like BuzzFeed and Junkee and Pedestrian in Australia. These outlets rely predominantly on native advertising, but they also demonstrate that native advertising can also be not beneficial, not good, but not bad if done well.